Welcome to another episode of the Mindset Athlete Podcast with me, James Roberts, transformational coach, two-time Paralympian, and TEDx speaker. I have another awesome episode for you today, so let's get straight into it. And on today's show, I've got Arianna Criscione. Arianna started her career in the United States playing for universities teams, UCLA Bruins, where she was a part of the #1 recruiting class in the nation, and then went on to Boston College, where she was Female Student Athlete of the Year. In 2008, she moved to Europe to pursue her dream of becoming a professional player. At the time, there was no professional league in the United States, and Europe was her only option. Her first stop was Sweden, where she played for. Can you pronounce the team? Because I'm gonna get that wrong.
For EF Denmark.
And then off to the land of pizza and pasta, Italy, where she played from 2009 to 2014 at Torres Calcio Femminile on the Isle of Sardinia, where she won 3 domestic titles, a Coppa Italia and 3 Italian Super Cups, while also playing numerous games in the UEFA Women's Champions League and getting her first caps with the Italian national team. During the summer of 2014, she decided she wanted a new challenge and make a quick pit stop in the Netherlands, where she joined reigning Dutch champions FC Twente before, in January 2015, making her first foray into French football with Saint-Étienne, where she played until May 2016. In Saint-Étienne, she had the worst thing happen in the best possible place, a season-ending injury where doctors thought would be career-ending, having torn her ACL, MCL, and PCL, and both meniscus all at the same time. But after 18 months of intense rehab and a lot of determination, she returned triumphant to the field and returned to Sweden for the second time with...
In Sweden?
Yeah.
Well, no, I went to Norway first, and then I went to Sweden. So I went to Fart, which is really funny, and then I went to Kungsbacka.
Okay. Before taking on the challenge at another French club, Saint-Malo, in 2017. She currently plays for PSG in the French league, while also holding a position in the business side, leading the women's sporting initiative. In 2018, she decided to pursue a promise to her mother of returning to school and getting a master's. She completed her master's in football business in Switzerland, which allowed her to become the only player in PSG history to have 2 contracts with the club, one as a player on the women's pro team and a second in the marketing department as women's sponsorship manager. She is also one of the only players, if not the only player in Europe, to have 2 contracts within a major club. So there's pretty much you've done everything coming in with my eyes. But let's talk about this is all seriousness of pretty much if you not only have had 1 ligament injury but 3, and obviously I didn't even mention in the question that I asked you via email, obviously having the meniscus injury as well. Talk to myself and the audience of how debilitating mentally was that for 5 injuries to happen all at once.
Honestly, it was probably easier that it all did happen at one time. I think it would have been horrible if I would have done one thing and then been able to come back and then done another thing and vice versa. That would have taken 5 years rather than just the 18 months that it did take. So on one hand, it was absolutely horrific. It was a rough time. I'd gotten out of one club, and I was really happy by the time I got to France. I was really excited to play in France in the top division and play against the best players in the world, the best teams in the world. Undoubtedly at that time, Lyon and Paris Saint-Germain were great clubs, and I was really excited to represent Saint-Étienne and play against them. And so to get that injury was really rough. My mom ended up moving to France to help me because I literally couldn't kind of live by myself comfortably. And so she was amazing. My whole family behind me was amazing. And that definitely helped mentally, though, them pushing me and supporting me and knowing. A lot of people ask me how you come back from that. And to me, it was never a question of coming back from that. It was just when. Like, I was going to come back no matter what. The doctors weren't too sure, but I decided I was. And a lot of people around me said I could and I would. So I did. And I just made every day count. So every exercise I had to do, I did exactly the number of exercises. I had a stopwatch with me. If they told me to do 10 and then wait 2 seconds, I literally did it exactly to the T of everything they told me. And at night when there was training, I would go to the field on my crutches and I would just do laps, like hobbling around the field to make sure that I was still doing stuff and not kind of getting down on myself and frustrated at home.
And do you think that mentality has pretty much stood you in good stead, especially obviously with us living with a pandemic of the women's game kind of being put into one side from a financial position because of whatever reason? I call it unjust, because if it's sport to be entertaining, what's the difference between the men's and the women's game? Pretty much nothing from an entertainment perspective. But obviously you talked about a winning mentality. Where does that come from for you specifically, Arianna?
I think growing up, both of my parents are go-getters and worked extremely hard for what they had. And I also have an older sister, and she does too. And I think it really does stem from our parents of working hard and treating us. My dad always said we weren't boys or girls, we were just humans, and that he was going to treat us that way. And so we could wear dresses, but we could also climb trees and scrape our knees and play sports and do whatever we wanted on fields, courts, whatever sport it was, but also academically. And they always pushed us to do the best that we personally could. So I definitely thank my parents for that attitude, and I still see it in them today. So I guess that's definitely where it comes from.
That's very humbling of you to say. But what drew you to obviously for the American, obviously soccer, but football for the Europeans? Being in the obviously growing up in the United States, you've got the allure of basketball and other sports to kind of grab your attention. For you more specifically, what drew you to the game?
So it's actually a funny story, and I tell it all the time, but it's just the truth. My sister actually started playing soccer before I did football, and the reason she started playing is she was a little bit chubby, not major or anything, but my mom just wanted to make sure that she was active, so she actually signed her up for football against my dad's will. My dad at that time hadn't really wanted us to play sports. He'd originally wanted sons, and he got daughters, so he wanted us to do tap and do more quote unquote female sports. And my mom decided, she saw a flyer and thought soccer would be great for my older sister. It would get her active, it would get her running more and just keep her healthy. So she signed my sister up, and then she came home and convinced my dad it was a good idea. My sister played her first season. The second season, I got signed up too. And the second season, my dad became my sister's head coach, and he would go out, and he was actually an American football player. So I originally learned how to catch a soccer ball like in American football. So I'd take it like that and things like that. But yeah, playing catch with my dad are some of the best memories I have. So it just kind of went from there. My sister's my biggest fan, so it's just a family affair now.
And I obviously said in the introduction you've been capped for Italy. With you having a surname of Italian descent, why did you pick to represent Italy but not the United States, or is that just happened?
No, I mean, it's simply because I wasn't being called to the national team by the US, and I actually had a major mistake in university, which is why I changed universities. I had a major F up. I don't know how else to say it, in a major game. And from my standpoint, my coach never forgave me. So I decided to transfer universities. That changed my life. And then that coach ended up becoming the head coach for the US national team. So I figured I'd never have a shot. And because of heritage and having a second passport, and Italy for me also being the land of football, like calcio is everything. It was a great honor to wear the jersey of Italy and play for my ancestors.
That's well, you would hope that coach didn't hold a grudge, but ultimately sport probably does. I think that's what's the misconstrued to the general public of what you play a position that's very unforgiving from a media perspective. They'll always blame a goalkeeper. Most of the pundits in this country are outfield players. So them to criticize a goalkeeper is like, well, I'd like to see you be put in that position. And
I mean, everybody has their opinion, everybody has their viewpoint. Hers, it might be completely different than mine was, even at the time. I'm old enough, been doing this enough that everything happens for a reason, and I made my choice, she made her choice, and it's all good. Like it's cool. I'm happy where my life is today, and I know all the twists and turns that it's taken. I wouldn't be here if there weren't all those twists and turns. So I'm really happy suiting up for Paris Saint-Germain and finishing my career here in Paris. So it's all good now.
Is it a lifelong dream to within the game as a whole, obviously that those three letters are pretty recognizable within football, is especially within the women's game. Do you think it is a nice way for you to, well, you say finish out your career, but obviously you've got now a career after with it within
To finish
the.
my football career, to hang my gloves up, I will be hanging my gloves up in a few months at the end of the season for sure, no doubts about it. And absolutely, it's a phenomenal place to be able to end my career here. We're actually number one in the league, so I would love to end on a league title, Champions League title, French Cup title, and just go out right on top. It would be the best ending to my fairy tale story.
And we were talking about off air. You said it's been a kind of a blessing in disguise, the pandemic, because it's gone from having to have more coverage on the TV, which I'm actually, I would say, surprised.
I mean, I'm not sure I would say a blessing in disguise. I think this year we would have gotten the TV rights that we received anyways. I think it's a blessing for me to be playing football right now, being able to get outside with all the different rules and curfew like rules that we have here in France. Honestly, when I'm freezing outside or when I'm just tired and I don't want to train, I try to remind myself how lucky we actually are to be able to get up and besides play every day, but especially right now in this moment where it's really difficult for a lot of people. And we have the opportunity to continue what we love doing outside in a group with our friends, hanging out, joking and playing football. So yeah, I think we're really blessed right now, to be honest.
And you talked about obviously the restrictions that you've got in France. Has the French government said to football, and I'll use the UK, because the UK government's kind of it's not a mandate. It's kind of say, please try not hug and do the normal things you would do in a celebratory fashion. Have the French government said that to French sport as well, to kind of say, well, celebrate, do obviously celebrate, but not in close quarters?
I mean, celebrate is kind of a weird word because I don't know where you're going with that. If somebody scores a goal, my teammates are going to jump on them. That's just kind of an innate, like you've been doing that for the last 20, 30, 10, whatever years you've been playing every time, even like Sunday football. It's just natural. You're not just going to run up and like fist bump or like elbow each other. We don't hug and kiss anymore like we originally in France. Like we don't do the cheek kisses anymore. We don't high five each other if it's not for a goal or something. We try to keep our masks on at all like times until we step on the field. So we have it in our training room. We have it theoretically in the gym as much as the doctor forces us to. We have it in our when we have lunch and breakfast. If we get up from the table, we have to put our masks back on. So there's definitely new rules and regulations.
Was it challenging at first then?
Oh, for sure. But I mean, now everybody's just used to wearing a mask and just the way it is. So you can't really do much about it.
And you talked about, the early days of the episode of being out and playing catch with your dad with American football. Did that make it an easy transition to play the position then as a goalkeeper, because you're just naturally catching? Okay, the ball differs, but
yeah, no, I mean, no, he would throw he would throw a football, like a soccer ball at me. He would just throw it like he'd throw it overhand like an American football, and I would catch it and then go like this. So no, the catching part, and then I learned how to slide tackle, and that was that. I would just got too many cards when I was a kid because I had no control over it. But if you came at me, I would just like run right into you, or like the no fear part was never a problem. And then goalkeeper coaches who actually had experience and understood how to play the position were like, okay, we can work with that. Like she just goes at them like a brick wall. So that worked out in my favor as a kid. I did get carded out of a lot of games though in the beginning.
Why? Because you were a little bit out of control, and
yeah, I would just slide tackle into people. Didn't really care. They fell over. Didn't really care. Like, if I went for a cross, I would just come out like balls to the walls, go to punch it. If I missed the ball and hit somebody, I didn't really care. Like, so I was just really straightforward, like a train.
So you'd be well suited to playing in the 70s then.
Probably. Old school English football, just like kick and run into people. I probably would have been amazing. Then I would have been like a star midfielder forward. No, not really, because I hate running, but.
Well, the forwards don't run that much. It's tactical.
Just being in the right place at the right time.
Well, your position has changed over the decades. You've got
absolutely
very much an extra defender now of, the style of, well, Barcelona, Pep Guardiola, and the Barcelona teams of playing with 11 players. It's for some that are very well. You'd probably be very suited because you were very gun ho from an early age. If you make a little bit of a mistake, I'll make up for it.
Yeah, exactly.
But obviously, we said at the very beginning of the introduction, you were one of a kind in terms of having 2 contracts. Is that quite a novelty and I'll pose 2 questions with this, Arianna. Is it quite of a balance in the early days? Was there quite of a bit of a balance act on your part?
Well, so I've only had 2 professional contracts like I do now here at Paris Saint-Germain. At other clubs I played for, I didn't have other contracts. At other clubs, sometimes I worked on the side because I had extra time or because our club wasn't paying us like they were supposed to. But I chose to come to Paris because I wanted to get the experience in the business sector also and use my master's degree that I'd received. So yeah, it's absolutely a balancing, and it's difficult to balance. I'm not going to lie. I had 2 trainings today. I had a business meeting in between the 2 trainings. I'm chatting with you now. And I still have work to do after. So it definitely is, but it's all things, in my opinion, in life. If you want something and you enjoy what you're doing, you find a way to do it and you find a way to balance it.
Well, I think you're quite a go-getter in terms of, just talking to you and ultimately, well, I'm not in awe, but in terms of, social media presence, you probably utilize all facets of your degree, your skill set within the sponsorship arena, and then also as a playing career, you can kind of steer certain things. So for me, it's to be commended. And obviously, coming back from what doctors or the health professionals said would be career ending, I think ultimately it does showcase of not a winning at all cost mentality, as you were not happy to be sitting around or lounging around and taking the easy out. I won't call it quitting mentality, because ultimately if they tell you to rest, you should a little bit listen to that as well. But you were willing to think outside the box for your recovery. If I need to hobble around the outside of the field to do it, I'll do it. And I think that's to be commended, because your position is not as commended for putting in the mileage.
Thanks.
You probably have to do a lot of running in preseason, irrespective if you're going to do that in a game.
So I think though we have to do a lot of fitness style stuff. It's just not the same as just straight running back and forth. It's a lot of up downs, like lay on the ground, jump up, get like dive up, and sometimes that can be much harder. Like 3 sprints is actually much easier than diving 10 times and popping back up, but it's just different. We're used to it, and it's easier for me to do fitness if there's a ball than just straight running. I would never be a track athlete.
Do you get quite a lot of repetition injuries then? And I mean minor ones of taking the ultimately. Obviously, we're in the middle of winter, so the ground's not as forgiving.
No, not actually that. I mean, we're so used to diving that unless just for some reason you land on something or you land weird, but usually it's almost like riding a bicycle. It's memory, muscle memory. Our bodies remember how to dive. Don't get me wrong. Like when we have a bit of a break, so even after Christmas, when we come back, your sides of your hips and stuff are just a little sore because you're not used to it like you once were. Or even after quarantine, it was pretty sore coming back. But no, usually most goalkeepers' bodies are pretty used to it after how long have I been doing this? 20 years I've been doing this, so more. I've been doing this for like 25 years. So no, my muscle memory is pretty solid.
And do you have, because we were talking about the 70s of the rough and tumble of pretty much you don't need to take the ball, but then you would have got the rough of the green as a goalkeeper because there was no mercy. If you were in the way, they just bundle you out the way and it's a goal.
Exactly. It just hit you. And there was no gloves. And like that had to be rough.
But what? There's loads of things. But it's like comparing apples to oranges.
It's not the same thing.
It's a different. The game's completely different. The ball is a different topic altogether. I think every time there's a major tournament, the ball
Changes.
for you guys is probably awful.
Horrible. Absolutely.
Do you think some of these companies should maybe sit down with them as well, with the goalkeepers, and say, well, okay, you want to see more goals, but we can't even.
No, I don't. I don't actually think the companies care. I think they sit down with the forwards and figure out how they can get it to swerve and twist and make it even harder for goalkeepers. Because, as we kind of discussed before you started recording, though, fans want to see goals.
Well, if you want goals,
they might not want as many as American sports, but no matter what, even in England, you want to see goals.
Well, that's why I've got Manchester United top on. I was very surprised with the FA Cup game with Liverpool. Tuesday, just Sunday gone, as that had 5 goals, and they only played the week before, and it wasn't dull because I watched the highlights, but that was what would the American audience would be boring because it ended in no score. But
exactly
for the European audience, I was relieved because Liverpool was a more dominant team in the league encounter, and ultimately they came out on the winning side. I wasn't positive, but I think what this year showcases, with no fans, it's kind of been a leveler for any opposition. You can go into any stadium as the visitor and win, whereas we talk about probably 2-3 years ago, that's you're more likely to lose going into some of these big stadiums. And obviously with the women's game, I think obviously the World Cup has definitely helped that, with it being in France and the French public getting behind it, and it's kind of grown on esteem from that, because you've gone from the German league from Baganer being the more dominant to obviously the French taking over. Probably the French and the English would probably argue who's got the dominant league now. There's probably it's definitely more money going into the WSL now, because they're getting the Americans coming over to play, and probably getting put ready for the Olympics as well. And whether or not they stay on is a different one, or go back to bigger clubs like Lyon, PSG, and the likes of that. But from a standpoint from your work life now, Arianna, how challenging is it to try to, because you said this off air, of stepping out, you said from a playing perspective, of the women stepping outside of the shadows of the men's. How difficult is it for your day-to-day job to showcase the women to be their own identity?
I wouldn't say it's actually that difficult, to be fair. When I present to a sponsor or to a company or to a stakeholder, one, just saying the name PSG obviously opens a door because people are interested to hear what you have to say. And then 2, I have an amazing group of women that I play with. So the individual stories that can make a brand more authentic and actually connect that brand to certain players, to certain stories, I think is actually a lot better coming from the women's view than what happens in any club's men's football team. Just the stories and the histories that my players have are better. I mean, we've got a woman on our team who, once she's finished her career in a couple of years, she'll be a surgeon. She's halfway done. She's basically done through medical school. She just has to actually go in and do the time that she can't do right now because she's obviously on the field. We have a lot of girls that have started their own charities. We have girls on our team that are entrepreneurs. A lot have kind of built themselves in their own right and have created a brand amongst themselves off the field. So I think going to different sponsors, it's great being able to tell the story of my teammates.
But you've got a good one as well.
I've got an interesting one too.
In theory, that's an Under Armour story. The underdog of, what is their slogan? Going through a brick wall. Your
no, for sure
relates to that.
But also the fact that it's me calling those brands and discussing with them, being somebody coming from the field and also being somebody with an ear to the locker room. I actually know exactly what my players like and what they don't like, and what makes sense to work with and what doesn't make sense to work with, which I think is actually a huge advantage that a lot of men's teams don't have, because the marketing team isn't as close or connected with the players as obviously I am with mine.
Do you think that's an advantage for you going forward because of that relationship and that bond that you've got?
Absolutely. But it's also too because I actually know what I'm selling. I know it inside and out. I've been on both sides of it. I understand the business side of it. So I understand that while I would love to say we should get everything we want, we can't. Just the finances aren't there. We don't bring in the funds that would like make sense to do that. But I also really know what the players are thinking and what they want and how they think. So I think it makes a huge difference.
But what do you think is going to need to transition to be ultimate? You said that it's going to be only a matter of time to when women will be able to demand, the sort of money that the male players probably take for. I'm going to go out on a limb and say some of them probably take for granted.
Well, I mean, I think we've had a very small handful that have already been able to get kind of high numbers, which is fantastic. It's so great. The biggest problem we have now is the discrepancy between the highest paid player on the team and the lowest paid player on the team, which there might be those discrepancy within the men's game, but those zeros are different. Like, it's just not the same. The lowest paid player on Manchester United men is not crying for money. He's not hurting in any way. No matter.
It's probably an academy player as well, or they've just broken into the first team. And ultimately,
Possibly.
most of those individuals, and this is, I think, what's wrong with men's sport in general, is pretty much they've had a handout for their entire lives. They've had entitlement from maybe I'll say at least their teenage years of they might be in an academy for by the time they're 13, 5 years plus, and by the time they make it into the first team, you don't know what the real world looks like.
Oh no, they're totally disconnected from reality.
Well, that's why it's probably difficult now to kind of say, well, obviously the Premier League went out on a limb. We will not have a circuit break. Okay, but the rest of the population would possibly like that sport, maybe, well, football in this case, take a little bit of a back step of their one of the reasons why transmission is up in this particular city. That should be from an emotional standpoint pretty. I know it's very difficult because
it's really difficult because there's a lot. I mean, you can argue that the salaries are too high or this or that, but at the same time, they wouldn't get paid those salaries if the clubs weren't making that money, and they wouldn't get paid those salaries if there weren't broadcasting rights, and they wouldn't get paying those salaries if it wasn't a competitive league. And I think a lot of people also forget how much money clubs bring into the cities, how much work is actually created through football being played, how much work is actually being lost right now since you don't have fans, because taking fans out of the stadium means there's not security going on, means there's not the vendor selling food in there, means there's not the people walking up and down, the aisles, either selling food or smaller security. There's not tickets. There's a lot of stuff. There's not the outside economy. So those bars aren't getting the footpath that they usually get. The hotels aren't getting it. All of that rolls into sporting events happening in those areas. And so while you're frustrated what the players are getting, they're also creating a lot of jobs and a lot of economy. Also, even too, like going down to just tourism within football. You guys get, and Ryanair has done a great job actually of monetizing, bringing in, Scandinavia to come to Premier League games. You guys also have a huge tourism with Asia because of it. That's a lot of money coming in from a lot of different places. That's not happening now, which is also really hurting a lot of people.
Well, I think I would go out on a limb. I'd say the big six are probably okay. Manchester United, Manchester City, Liverpool.
Oh no,
Chelsea.
I'm not talking about the clubs. I'm talking about those other businesses that actually like profit from football. I'm talking about the small pubs next door to the stadiums. I'm talking about the airline industry. I'm talking about small hotels next to stadiums. I'm talking about students who work just weekends at football games, selling Coke up and down the stadium, or selling nuts outside, or selling beanies or scarves outside the stadiums. All of those small things are clearly not happening anymore, and those people are definitely suffering.
Well, you forget about that, don't you? You get a little bit self-absorbed, probably me included. Of I don't fixate on the amount of money that people are paid, because if it was the shoe was on the other foot, nobody would turn it down.
Right. I mean, is it their fault that that's what the market has now produced?
No, that's the industry. That's an industry that you work in, television and sponsorship of, but that's demand. That's it's a demon in itself. It's kind of a backlash in terms of you're going to create demand for what you just talked about. The market of the Asians wanting Premier League. That's going to bring in revenue. Pretty much, the men's game ultimately is renowned worldwide for its its expansive style of play. But I think it's difficult because it's quite hard when you see, when you look further down the pyramid of, the smaller clubs, like really, really struggling. It is a little bit complex. Our government's decision as well. This level of play can happen, but this one can't. But it's still the same game. It's like, well, that lower down the chain probably need it a little bit more.
They probably need it, but also without ticket sales and that stuff, how are they going to survive? And plus, to be completely realistic, clubs with more money and the professional clubs, they can afford to keep their players tested on a regular basis. They can afford to keep their players separated. They can afford the type of facility and the new structure that needs to be put in place very quickly. They can also pay for the private planes or a type of travel that allows the players not to be in like contact with others. So, they can also afford to open an entire hotel that might have been closed previously, but they can rent it for a day, and that's enough money to to rent it out. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. I can definitely see both sides of the story, but I think there's a lot more to the story that people forget about when they want it to be shut down.
What it's that's the difficulty, because it is. I think you're not sympathetic for players not willing to go, and this is like months ago, willing to go back and play. But I think from a human perspective, um, I can wholly reconcile with what that player wanted to do, because if he wanted to stay alive, it was I'm not playing irrespective of I make 10,000, 100,000 a week, which
I
I
mean,
think from a
everybody, like, yeah, I mean, this is a pandemic. Nobody really knows what's really happening. So I think everybody has to make personal choices that you really can't judge them for when you don't know what's happening in their personal household, their family members, and they don't need to tell you. It's not, it's not society or the audiences or their fans' right to know through social media what's actually happening. Though, like, players do have a right to their privacy and to make their own personal decisions.
But is that what's difficult with the kind of a microcosm that's being created, with social of Instagram, Twitter, of the actual, I'm not gonna use my words carefully, but the fans deeming they have the right to say what they want. They think that they have that close contact to the individual. Obviously, there's the digital
Screen.
barrier there anyway.
I mean, I think too, people also have to realize that no matter what you see on Instagram, it's just what somebody wants to show you. A picture can be worth 1,000 words, but it can be 1,000 false words, or it can be, diction, word choice is a huge thing. So you can see a picture and you can choose what you see in it. And that might not be what I'm trying to represent in my picture, or even in the caption that I put there. And that's everybody's prerogative to kind of do that. And don't get me wrong, some people should not be posting some of the pictures. Like, this is a pandemic. You don't need to be traveling to certain places at certain times and partying or putting yourself in bad situations and then actually documenting it. I think that's absolutely crazy. But there's other stuff that you can show a picture and be really happy, but in reality, you're really sad, or you're dealing with some stuff that doesn't click in that 1 second that you took the photo. So it's really hard to say. But I think sometimes athletes get a hard rap, and sometimes people need to step back and maybe try to put themselves in their position and think, what would they do? Like, it's not necessarily black or white. Not every decision is right or wrong or that easy.
But I think people are quick to make quick decisions. And I think me being I won't say former, but in past life being an athlete, I'm probably sympathetic and unsympathetic at different
For sure.
times.
There's like two sides. I totally agree. There's some stuff where you're just like, really? Why would you do that? And then there's other stuff where you're like, well, I can see where, that happened.
But you were talking about obviously ending your career on a high note. What, as we're recording this, how many games have you got left? And ultimately, I know that the managers like to talk a good game. As I'll use Ole Gunnar Solskjaer because he's obviously manager of Manchester United. It's only 3 points, and we don't think about the table irrespective. But as of right now, what does the situation look like? Because I know you said you're top of the table, but how does
Well, no, I mean,
look?
the way our league goes, you have to win every game. We have to win every single game from now until the end. From French Cup to the league to there's no room for error for us. It's not necessarily like the Premier League where you could drop a point or 2 points and you're going to recuperate it because that just happens in the Premier League. It's not like one team can go the entire season without losing a game or dropping a point. And Lyon is in our league, so we can't drop a point. They're not going to make any mistakes, so we can't either. So it's a lot of wins that we have left to do.
But you were talking about the clean sweep anyway, so it's like you wanna pretty much have a nice little.
I wanna get 3 points on every single game that we play from today on.
Well, that's you can only control half of that outcome, as in trying to keep a clean sheet.
Yeah, I mean, we just need to stay connected as a team, and what will be will be.
And you talked about obviously that rivalry. Well, that's my words. You talked about obviously having Leo in the league. How much of a rivalry is that in the women's game? Because ultimately, I know
Huge.
in the men's game it's pretty big. Is it bigger because of the ultimate overriding factor of those two games
are going to make or break the league? Yeah, for sure. That's the game that everybody tunes into. That's the game where you're going to get most people in the stadium. That's the game that everybody's waiting for and paying attention to.
So that's one not to make any mistakes. Going back to your days as in the collegiate.
Exactly. Exactly.
And from all the places that you've played as a goalkeeper or as a football player, which has been the most scrutinizing from a press perspective?
Oh, PSG for sure. But I don't know if they're necessarily scrutinizing, but the most press is here. I mean, we have a communication. Our head of communication only works with us and only for the women's side. We have an entire, staff or team that works fully for the women's side, which isn't as often in most clubs yet.
And you talking about that's been a good thing. And but what I meant by that, Arianna, is the French press more, or the Parisian press more unforgiving?
I don't really know. I think that's a really hard question because you also have to think that I've been playing pro for 15 years now. And so with that said, every year there's more press or every year there's more communication. So it's really hard to compare the club today that I play for versus the club I played for 15 years ago, where just wanting the press to write anything about us over the weekend and have anybody watch the game was a big deal, to now it's like, okay, can we sell out? Okay. Are we going to open the biggest stadiums for our big games? Like these kind of questions. So again, it's kind of what you said before. It's comparing oranges to apples. It's not the same thing anymore.
And do you think, obviously the BBC had done a docu series of West Ham football, women's football club now. Do you think that's only a good thing to be able to show behind the scenes of player recruitment, and showing the person, as opposed to what you would deem if you tuned in on a match day of just seeing the player? Do you think it's what society wants to see of more and more? Because ultimately,
absolutely. I mean, I think they want to see it in all sports, and male or female. I think everybody wants to see what really happens and the truth behind it. But even the docuseries, you see more, but there's a lot that goes on that nobody's going to talk about.
So wrapping up on the episode, Arianna, my penultimate question I want to ask you is, if you had to sit down with any athlete, dead or alive, who would that be and why? And I know that's a very difficult question.
I think this is too difficult. I feel like I'd rather just have a big dinner party where lots of athletes could be there and interact and chat. And I don't know, there's so many like really famous athletes that obviously you have like the Michael Jordans or LeBron James, or I mean Tom Brady right now. I think he's just proven himself as a GOAT. Even like George Best, Pele from soccer, and Zola, and so many. Even Buffon would be cool at my table. But I think I'd also just love, this sounds crazy, but it's my generation. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the 99ers, but that's the US Women's World Cup team that won the 99 World Cup. And I was a 14-year-old girl watching that game live with them playing, and I followed that team, and those were my heroes. So I feel like sitting down with those women and saying thank you, and seeing the path that they carved for all of us women who are playing now, whether or not you're playing in a different country and you have no idea who they are. Those are the women's that really created marketing for women. Mia Hamm, who had a Gatorade commercial with Michael Jordan, is definitely still one of my idols. And I think I'd love to sit down with them and chat with them. And then I think it'd be really cool. I don't know their names, but I think it'd be also super cool to sit down with the Dick Kerr ladies, and have them tell their stories and learn about the games that they played, where they had like 50,000 people come to their games, and in like the 20s, 30s, 40s and stuff like that, to hear their story before football got canceled for women. I think that would be super cool too.
And my penultimate question to you, Arianna, before we wrap up the episode, is if you had to summarize what we've been speaking about into one sentence for people to take away, what would that be?
Women can do anything they want.
I think that's a great one to end on. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very, very, very busy schedule, both on the field and also in the office. So thanks again, Arianna. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and got loads from it. Anything that was included and discussed will be available in the show notes below. And I would love to hear from you. Come and connect and ask your questions. I've been James Roberts from jamesowenroberts.com. Remember this quote by Chris Harth: an athlete is a mindset. It's how you prepare, think, and execute, not by some elite status or physical stature. Anybody can be an athlete.